We're going to go ahead and roll. Let's go. Let's get it. Good evening. What's that? Well, that's good. Okay, I need a clicker. What's that? Yeah, I'll get it. No, you're good. I'll find it. If not, I'll motion to you. Rob, thanks for joining our class tonight. Now you can say positively or negatively about the class at the end with pure and true conviction. Well, you haven't heard the lesson. Okay, I want to start off by saying a lot of what I'm going to be speaking about tonight is not my area of expertise, despite having a course in it at the Bible Institute, despite reading and studying it for our Convicted series, despite reading and studying for it tonight for the flood. I'm not a paleontologist. I'm not a geologist. I'm not a biochemistry, biomechanical engineer. I don't hold a PhD in anything, but I'm just going to try to put forth some evidence, and then if you guys want to refute it or if you want to talk about it a little bit more, I'm fine with that. Just don't expect too much out of me because I'm limited. Now, if we're going to talk about Bible or if we're going to talk about food, I can do it. I mean, we can talk about, look at me. I can talk about food. But that was my background before I came here. I was in food service for 10 years and then Bible after that. But anyways, but it doesn't matter. You don't have to hold a theology degree to know Bible. You don't have to have a PhD to know geology. You simply look at the evidence, and of course it would help. That would mean you're educated in those areas. But I know many people that are leaps and bounds above me in Bible knowledge, and not only Bible knowledge, but it doesn't matter how much Bible you know. The only thing that matters is how much you apply the Bible. That's the only thing that matters. So it's one thing for you to know Bible, but it's another thing for it to be applied. So anyways, we're going to talk a little bit about the evidence of the flood. So we're going to go through the text real quick. I'm just going to read through it just to kind of wrap up some loose ends. You guys all know this story about the flood. So we're going to pick up in chapter 7 and verse 6. Noah was 600 years old when the flood waters came upon the earth. And Noah and his sons and his wife and his sons' wives with him went to the ark to escape the waters of the flood, of the clean animals and of the animals that were not clean, and of the birds and of everything that creeps on the ground. 2 and 2, male and female, went into the ark with Noah as God commanded Noah. And after 7 days, the waters of the flood came upon the earth. In the 600th year of Noah's life, in the second month, the 17th day of the month, on that day, all the fountains of the great deep burst forth, and the windows of the heavens were opened. Rain fell on the earth 40 days and 40 nights. On the very same day, Noah and his sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and Noah's wife, and the 3 wives of his sons with them entered the ark, they and every beast according to its kind, all the livestock according to their kinds, and every creeping thing that creeps on the earth according to its kind, and every bird according to its kind, every winged creature. They went into the ark with Noah, 2 and 2 of all flesh, in which there was the breath of life. So, see, we see this thing. All of this is kind of coming to a head. What we've been talking about all week, the ark, the 2 of every kind, with the addition of the clean things. Through which Noah would offer a sacrifice at the end, so there are extra animals besides the 2 of every kind that went on the ark. So, and it's the main thing that we can draw out of our animal section is the term barim or baraim, which is kind. which we would liken to family or genus in our taxonomic system that we have today. So species is very different, or how we use the term species. We're not looking at chihuahuas and dachshunds, and we're not looking at that going onto the ark. We're looking at the canines. We're looking at the felines, the family or genus Felidae. That's what we're looking at with the kinds. They went into the ark. I already read that. Verse 16. And those that entered, male and female of all flesh, went in as God had commanded him, and the Lord shut him in. The flood continued 40 days on the earth. The waters increased and bore up the ark and rose high above the earth. The waters prevailed and increased greatly on the earth, and the ark floated on the face of the waters, and the waters prevailed so mightily on earth that all the high mountains, and that is the high mountains at that time. That's not the high mountains as we come to know it today. It is the high mountains at that time. The catastrophic plate tectonic theory that would have formed the mountains during the flood and even continued to form after the flood would have been forming the mountains that we come to know it today. The Rockies and the Himalayan mountains and other mountain ranges that we know on the earth today. So the mountains weren't that big as the flood waters were starting to prevail. Wouldn't have taken much. We're not looking at Mount Everest type of elevation to cover. So people today want to argue, well, that would require, however billions or whatever millions of tons of water. We don't have that much water on Earth. The structure, the formation of the Earth was very different. And we can see that with evidence that we're going to talk about here in a second, with the rapid deposition of layers, with the sedimentary layers that are on Earth. We'll get to that here in a second. So the Earth then that the waters were starting to come upon was very different than the Earth that we see today. More on that here in a second. The waters prevailed above the mountains, covering them 15 cubits deep, and as was talked about with Jeremy, I think a few nights ago, the ark being 30 cubits deep, and the half that's needed for the ark to prevail, 15 cubits, so it would make sense that the waters would prevail or cover 15 cubits above the highest elevation, so that the ark could pass over it, and all flesh died. And sometimes we just kind of gloss over that. Everything died. How much hope and how much love God had put into making his creation so very good and so perfect. The strength of our sin, the strength of our hearts that were only set on doing wickedness continually. And as my teacher had said, I was listening to some of his recordings today. He went to this graveyard, where dinosaurs were in Wyoming. He was unearthing in this kind of river basin, just vast amount of huge, massive dinosaur bones. And he thought, the power that it took to create those creatures, and then the worldwide power to destroy them. And he was it's kind of like walking on a crime scene and how horrific it could be, but, it's not so horrific, I guess, when you're looking at dinosaurs per se, but just the power and the wrath and the anger that comes upon the earth during this time because of sin. God takes sin very, very seriously. And the world today wants to minimize our sin as much as possible. And true repentance and true penitence comes when we want to eradicate sin out of our life, and the only way that we can do that is through Jesus. So, all the flesh died that moved on the earth: birds, livestock, beasts, all swarming creatures that swarm on the earth, and all mankind. Everything verse 22. Everything on the dry land, in whose nostrils was the breath of life, died. He blotted out every living thing that was on the face of the ground, man and animals and creeping things and birds of the heavens. They were blotted out from the earth. Noah was left. Only Noah was left, and those who were with him in the ark. and the waters prevailed on the earth 150 days. So that 150 days right there, and really subsequent days after, and even as the waters would subside, the earth is very active, so active that we can't comprehend it. Whenever we look at some of the sedimentary layers that have been laid, there's certain seismites. Who has heard of the term of seismite? Well, what that is that as these layers were forming, these sedimentary layers that would form, we're going to talk about it. I'm getting through the text a little bit, and then we're going to talk about the evidence a little bit. The thickness of some of these layers that were laid were, 6 feet deep. You go to the Grand Canyon, you're looking at even larger than that. And the area surrounding those layers, not in the Grand Canyon per se, but other parts of the world, you see the seismite, these earthquakes that kind of shatter and ripple through those layers. And the amount of cracking and rippling through there is indicative of the power of the earthquake that happened at that time. So, for example, geological evidence has shown that there's been seismic activity and only, impacting a few inches worth of these layers that were caused by an earthquake of, about like an 8.5. And that's pretty horrific. You guys know if you know the Richter scale, it's 8.5 it's going to cause some serious damage. But you're talking about a seismite that spans 5 feet or 6 feet. The type of earthquake that would span that deep of a layer is 16 times the strongest one that we'd probably have recorded, or at the very least. So I don't know if any of that makes sense to you. Basically, my numbers may not add up perfectly as maybe what would be out there. But the point of the matter is this. Things are happening within that 150 days and days afterwards that this world is changing underneath Noah and them. They're taking care, they're holding tight throughout all the tsunamis and the swishing and swashing of the waters. And underneath those waters, the earth is just rapidly depositing layers of mud and rock and other minerals to lay down these formations that I'm going to show you here in a second. All these things are happening within the 150 days and afterwards. But God remembered Noah and all the beasts and all the livestock that were with him in the ark. And God made a wind blow over the earth, and the water subsided. So basically, when this happens, I believe it's Psalm 104 and other times written in the Psalms, we see the mountains being raised, the valley is lowered, and the waters subside. And let's just go ahead and get into the evidence. Basically, the waters subside. Noah sends out a raven and a dove to find vegetation, to find a home. And when they don't come back, Noah looks out. He sees that the water is dry, or that the land is dry. They end up waiting a period of time. Then they come out and they start making their life on earth. Try it again, guys. Let's try it again. And you know what? We failed again. But just to show how God is very serious with wrath or with sin, his wrath shown upon us. Ricky, can you click me by chance and at least kind of get me started? Yeah, that works. Okay, so there's the flood. For they deliberately overlooked this fact that the heavens existed long ago, and the earth was formed out of water and through water by the word of God, and by the means of these the world that then existed was deluged with water and perished, talking about the days of Noah. Excuse me. So, we already went through these parts of the text, the fountains of the deep, and what the AP is just trying to do is trying to get you the idea of where the water's coming from. It's coming from beneath the earth. The waters, the sea levels are rising because of the waters of the deep are broken up. Also because of the volcanic activity The molten magma from the mantle is coming up, and it's pushing up the waters, as we'll talk about here in a little bit. The windows of the heaven, as was in that last slide. A lot of people subscribe to the water canopy theory. Who has heard of the water canopy theory? That there's been well, that's kind of fallen on some hard times because they're having a hard time making the model work because of when you have more moisture in the air, the greater the greenhouse effect, and therefore it's hard to sustain life because the atmosphere is warmer. So they had a hard time accounting for all that in the creation model. So, but I do believe that even now that there is some sort of water, moisture encompassing, surrounding the earth, whether that's the ozone layer or something beyond that, is still debated. So, but I think that whatever was protecting the earth at that time played a role into the longevity of life that would have happened to some sort of degree. But we can't be for certain. We're just theorizing here. But that's where they could have got some of the water from the windows of heaven, from up above. But also, I would say the majority of the water was that was jet streamed up because of as the molten magma would hit the sea floor, it would send up steam, enough moisture in the air that would cause water to fall. And that may be primarily what is that 40 days and 40 nights of rain, which could also come from the windows. There was a great increase. We also talked about that. The scope is global. You know, why would you build an ark if it wasn't global? Why have all the animals come to you if it wasn't global? How could the water cover the mountains? You know, is God you know, are we, if by saying that they didn't cover the mountains, what are we saying about God? Now, all these are arguments that are made from the atheists, but of course, by us pointing to the Bible and say, well, the Bible says that God isn't a liar, therefore he isn't, there still needs to be more evidence of it. There still needs to be more evidence. The subsiding we had talked about, the forming of the mountains, there's that Psalm 104 reference that I talked about. The mountains rose and the valley sank down to the place that you appointed for them. You set a boundary that they may not pass, so that they might not again cover the earth. And of course, that's very much a part of God's promise. He isn't going to let these flood waters in its totality like it was in the flood of Noah's day. He's not going to let it happen. So here we go. We're going to look at some evidence. During the Bill Nye and Ken Ham debate, Bill Nye did a great job kind of exposing some issues with the creation model, namely that we didn't have one. Ken Ham was so focused on dismantling the atheism model that we creationists have a hard time setting forth a scientific model for our own side. That is really science. Science is being able to make predictions. And that's really what it is. That's the reason why we engage in scientific method. We test our hypothesis. We have a hypothesis. We establish variables. We conduct the experiment. We make observations, and we come to a logical conclusion. You learned that in 5th grade. Or, I mean, I did at least. I don't know what you guys learned in 5th grade, but it's the scientific method. It's a part of it. So we need to be able to make predictions. So based on what we read, we need to be able to predict that certain things are observable in nature. And here's just a few of them. Whether or not the evidence is so powerful to you is up to you. Now, like I said, I'm not covering the whole scope of predictions. There's many more predictions that the creation model can make that's even outside of the flood. And so without getting too deep, we're just going to talk about the flood. Evidence, if the creation model is true, if the Bible is true, we would hope to find evidence that geological layers can form rapidly and that they'll be found. Evidence that canyons can be formed rapidly will be found. The fossil record will reveal fully functional and distinct creatures when they appear in the fossil record. Why? Why would we expect fully functional creatures to show up in the fossil record? And together at that. Well, the flood was rapid, but I would connect it to really the creation. we see that on day 6 and even the days before, day 5 and day 6, we see that creation was made all at once to a degree. Of course, 24-hour days between some, like the birds and the land animals. But God created everything at once. And so the fossil record would be evident of things existing together. Now, of course, how they sort themselves in those layers depends on their density and a lot of other things, but still yet, we wouldn't see this evolutionary process that would go on. We would see things existing together, fully formed, fully functional, as the fossil record should indicate if the Bible's true. We can also make predictions that there will be historical evidence that are found that corroborates the flood account, specifically through flood legends. There will be flood legends, as of course Jeremy has talked about that, I think a night or two ago. I need to keep track of my time because I may not allow for too much conversation, unfortunately, but butt in when you can because we have a short amount of time tonight. We also would see evidence that processes assumed to take place throughout eons of time will be found to be able to happen rapidly. Petrification, that process, it was assumed that the petrification process would happen over large amounts of times throughout many, many millions of years of time when, this process takes, I don't know how to say it, but months to years. It doesn't take long at all. I was listening to Kent Hovind. If you guys haven't had a chance to listen to Kent Hovind, I don't agree with everything that he says or does. He's a Baptist preacher and apologist, but he's got many things in his museum. He's got a petrified pickle that somebody just tried to close up and they forgot about it and left to the elements, and it was petrified. And of course, minerals need to get into those things to allow it to petrify. But he's got so many examples of petrified whatever that only took a short amount of time. There's been a dog that's been petrified in a tree. A dog was trapped itself in the tree, and it was petrified. Stone. It was so things that obviously don't take millions of years to have. So, anyways, and of course, I think Jeremy had talked about this idea of uniformitarianism, which simply means that the present and its processes and rates are the key to understanding the past. But, with the rapid sedimentation or the deposition from the Mississippi River depositing sediment to the Gulf of Mexico, the rate that it's been doing it, given a millions of years, the Gulf of Mexico would be full up already. Same with the Colorado River with the Grand Canyon. We've had discussions about salt in the ocean. There's rates with the magnetic field of the Earth getting weaker, with the lunar distance from the Earth. It's getting further and further away. So you go back millions of years, in the rate that it's moving, within a few thousand years, it's only going to move 100 or so feet. But you rewind that through millions of years, at some point, the moon's going to end up touching the Earth. And, of course, that's something that they don't want to admit because they'd have to change their model. So, basically, the idea of uniformitarianism is you're using today's rates and assuming that they have been constant throughout all of time. And if you do that, especially for the atheist, you run into major issues. You don't have even billions of years. You only have a few thousand years. But of course, that's making a lot of other assumptions. So this is kind of the model that AP has put out, and really has been understood by many young Earth creationists. is that when the flood happened, when it's on a scale that we couldn't imagine, earthquakes 16 times the greatest earthquake that we've ever experienced here. As the mantle is being pushed up, as the plates, the tectonic plates are shifting and moving, it's just a constant shaking of the earth, basically. And with the shaking of the earth, you're going to have magma seeping up through the bottom of the ocean floor, which is going to raise the sea levels because it's going to go ahead and start forming the new seabed, and it's going to push it up. And then whenever the waters will subside, it will become more dense. So as this heat is coming up, it's less dense, and it's going to be kind of right there at the top. But as it starts to cool off and settle, so you see the bottom of the ocean floor is going to be less dense and hot. But as the sea level starts to, with the end of the flood, it's going to settle. It's going to become cooler, less dense, which will allow the seafloor to shrink just a little bit. That would attribute to the water subsiding back into the oceans, and many other factors. With the rising of the mountains and rising of the earth and the lowering of the earth through the water eroding down, forming valleys, forming rivers, forming our current oceans that we know right now. And not only that, but with the Ice Age. The Ice Age came right after the flood because you need two factors for the Ice Age. You need warmer summers or longer summers, more moisture, and really a combination of both that would allow for those things to happen. So that would accumulate ice up in the poles, or at the opposite poles. They would freeze and then subsequently melt after the earth starts to find the state of equilibrium. It's been shaken up quite a bit. So that's just one model that they have. Geologists and geophysicists estimate that at its peak height, the ocean floor would have been over 3,000 feet higher than its initial level. And keep in mind, you think 3,000 feet, that doesn't even come close to touching any of our mountains today. Well, it didn't have to, because at the beginning of the flood, the earth did not have its mountain. And you said, well, didn't it say in the text that it was going to cover the mountains? Well, a mountain at that time isn't the mountains that we know today. The mountains then would be something like maybe it's like the Ozark Mountains and the Rocky Mountains. They're like pitiful mountains compared to the Rocky Mountains, and the Rocky Mountains to the Himalayas. So anyways, sedimentary rock layers. You can see in that picture those stratus, those lines. You guys probably, who's been to the Grand Canyon? Has anybody been to the Grand Canyon? Okay, just a few. You guys been to the Grand Canyon? Okay. It's awesome for about 5 minutes, and then you've seen the Grand Canyon. So, I don't know. Kyle, you may get a little more kick out of the Grand Canyon because it would probably mean something to you, having a geological background. So the rapid deposition. So as these earthquakes are happening, we're shaking up the earth. We're tsunamis are I don't even know what the word I was going to say, but I was going to say pulverizing the earth. Essentially, it's breaking up the dirt, it's breaking up all the rocks, and you step in anytime, Kyle, with any of this stuff. So as these things are happening all across the globe, it's laying these many layers down. Oh no, you guys see it? I can't see it. Into some major sequences that are seen throughout the whole entire North American continent. And this is just one sedimentary layer known as the Sauk mega sequence. And on top of that are many other sequences, the Tippecanoe mega sequence. And you see them being laid one right on top of another. These things are evident, and it's not only noticed in the North America, it's noticed in Asia, it's noticed in Europe, in Africa, and we see these layers that we wouldn't really get to see unless something eroded away the Grand Canyon to expose these layers. Now, a lot of this you may be, skeptical of. But the most important thing I want to really talk about this outside of these mega sequences is, here's a picture of, remember I talked about the ice being accumulated at the poles because of the ice age? Well, as the ice would melt, it would form mega lakes on the North American continent, I'm sure elsewhere. But if eventually there would be a breach in these lakes because they're so massive and there's nothing regulating them, there's nothing holding them together, that a break would happen right there, and this just rush of water would carve out what we know to be the Grand Canyon and then form subsequently the Colorado River. And I'm just saying, the Grand Canyon that you've seen carved out in a matter of days to a month, just with this constant flow and escaping of water throughout all of the Grand Canyon. And the thing is, all of this has kind of had been, I wouldn't really say theory, but it was fairly positive, but it didn't happen until Mount St. Helens happened that demonstrated and showed the same characteristics as what we see in the Grand Canyon. This is called the Little Grand Canyon. Does it look any similar to the Grand Canyon besides size? Yeah, it does. I mean, not besides size, I had that right. But you see that the strata right there in the top right of the picture, you kind of see these lines. Now, the strata there is just like a little bit like this. The strata that you see in the Grand Canyon you're talking feet. You're talking about moving water. That's what you need for sedimentary layers, is water. You need water to have these things. So with the explosion of Mount St. Helens, with the mudslides that were happening, and with the following earthquakes, we're going to see erosion. We're going to see a carving out. That's what happened. A mudslide happened here and ended up carving out part of Mount St. Helens, exposing those layers that was done on Mount St. Helens. Kyle, do you have anything so far? Am I messing up this geological part right now? Okay. He's our expert geologist here. I don't know much about geology outside of what I studied, so I rely on him for some deeper things. Mount St. Helens is an example on a smaller scale of what happened to the Grand Canyon. So we see that we don't see the Grand Canyon happening, mainly because depends on where that water had settled. Not everywhere around the earth had water settling to that degree, but if they did, and there has been other little Grand Canyons throughout the earth, but this is just Mount St. Helens was a real time. I mean, real time. It was just basically a laboratory of what we could have hoped the Grand Canyon would have been. And that's science. Making observation. That's science, something that's observable. So, yeah, go ahead, Kyle.
You might cover this later on in your presentation, but so you're talking about the water coming down and eroding the rock away.
Yeah.
So if it's a localized event, you get the Grand Canyon, you get these river channels. But if it's a global event like a flood, you're going to get that same erosion but across the entire surface. And that's what's called an unconformity.
Okay.
And so there is what is called the Great Unconformity, which is one of the anomalies of geology, where it's a worldwide event. You can find it anywhere in the world. If you go down to the basement rock, you get this great unconformity where there's a layer of rock record that is missing worldwide. And what's interesting to me is below the great unconformity, you have what's basement rock, so it's all igneous rock, which is magma that has been cooled, like during, say, a catastrophic
So is that base layer, that igneous rock, and then that which is on top of it? What is that? That's on. Is that still igneous or metamorphic, or what kind of?
There's pieces of it mixed in, but that's due to erosion. 'Cause
Okay.
at that point you have mountain ranges, and so a river flowing down or high winds or animals or rock slides, that's going to create some sort of igneous rock to be included in that sediment.
Okay.
But below it, it is just
Hard rock.
hard rock.
Yeah.
That's where you get your granites. That's where your hard, purely igneous rocks.
Well, I wish you guys could have heard that, and I'm not going to repeat it. So what you're going to have to look up at home is the great unconformity and kind of that base layer that kind of the, I don't want to say where the flood starts from there up, but it's a part of it. So look that up, the great unconformity, if you're a nerd like me and Kyle. So thank you for that, and I'm not repeating all that, and you won't ever get that out of me. Marine fossils in continents on mountains. How did these marine fossils get up on the mountains? Had there not been a global flood? The atheists seem to have some answers to that, but nothing that I've seen that's pretty powerful. You see evidence of marine fossils in the Himalayas, the highest mountains. So not unless a global flood had happened would we even see water even touching or having the hope of touching these types of mountains. And there's a picture of the Himalayas, and then we are running into the Cambrian explosion, where there's just all of a sudden a burst of complex life happening, and not only that, but within this layer, this Paleozoic and the Mesozoic, we just see fully functioning, fully forming in these layers. It's just kind of goes against everything that atheism says and evolution teaches. Now, of course, they'll say that these bottom ones, like that trilobite, that it's kind of to the center, to the right, they say that that's a simple organism. A trilobite is not a simple organism if you try to look at it and get down to it. And not even comparative to even some land creatures. Its eye is far more superior than what a human eye is. So we see that even through the rapid deposition, and I talked about the density of bones and things like this, there would be a general sorting, but they assume that sorting is representative of millions of years each, where that's simply not the case. I don't know. Kyle, do you have anything on that? Kyle's my co-teacher. Guys at home, I don't know if you know this, but he's my co-teacher. He's my co-dude.
So right there, that Paleozoic down to Precambrian, that black line that separates those, that is
The great unconformity, right. I do remember that, but, I lost it again. I'm back here. Hey. I lost my TV. Now I'm back. Okay, the petrified forest. So this is, for me, one of the most powerful evidences is these polystrate fossils where the tree is fossilized between all these layers. Now, if a tree is growing, if the evolutionary model is true, how much time I got left? Oh man, I'm not even going to come close to making it. If the evolutionary model is true, and if these layers took millions of years to deposit, we shouldn't see any living thing spanning through all of these stratas. It would rot away. The tree would rot away. Something would happen that the tree would rot away. We remember Jeremy talking about the whale standing on its end. Well, scavengers would come and take and pick apart the whale. We wouldn't see the whale lasting throughout all these strata. So with the logs at Spirit Lake, which is near the Mount St. Helens site, we know of these evidences, logs sorting in different layers, not only straight up and down, but prone, how the bark with the trees hitting one another breaks off, falls down below, forms a layer of peat, and then whenever subsequent earthquakes come, they become buried and forming coal beds and stuff like that. So all this, you think about, you put Mount St. Helens on a global scale, that's how you get all your coal. So anyways, let's move real quickly to the flood stories, and this is where we end for tonight, is don't forget the prediction. If Noah and his family stepped off the ark, do you think that's something to pass down to your family? Well, you better, because not only of the spiritual ramifications, listen, God takes sin seriously, but also the great magnitude. I mean, that is a story that's not going to go untold. It's just not. So in the North American flood stories, there's been a great flood, a few individuals saved, supernaturally warned, survived in a boat or canoe. Animals survived, birds were sent. In the Incan flood stories, there's a great flood. Only a man and woman survived in a floating box, which that's what the ark is. It's a chest. It's not supposed to go anywhere. Pacific Island flood stories. There's a great flood, submerged the island. Only a few survived. Animals survived, attributed to God or gods. Great flood in New Zealand. Anyways, these stories go on and on. That was New Zealand. This is Asian. There's Indian flood stories. And as Jeremy had mentioned last week, the most powerful thing about this is a lot of people want to refute the global flood, but 95% of these flood stories that have been passed down orally throughout the centuries and also at some point were written down, attest to a global flood happening in 95 of these. So if there's one thing that you are passing down to your family from centuries to centuries, it's the fact that, hey, this flood was a big deal and it was all over the place. And as we would suspect, we would see some tiny variations of who was saved, how many were saved. Those are details. But what isn't a detail is the foundational point of the story is everybody died and there was a great flood. So, spiritual importance of the flood, but as in the days of Noah were, so also the coming of man will be. Talking about when Jesus comes, everybody was in the days of Noah were happy and they were married and they were given in marriage, and basically we're going to be doing all the same things as they did, pretending like nothing's happening, nothing's going to affect us until boom, in a blink of an eye, Jesus comes. Just like that. There's not going to be any time for it to be like, whoa, wait up, God, hold on, let me get right with you. Because by the time it was for them to get right with God, they were drowning in water. So it's going to happen, blink of an eye. Got to be ready. I know, that's scary, but also powerful in the same vein. 2 Peter 3, verses 10, 11, talking about how Noah preached to them. And, oh, no, that's 1 Peter 3. This is 2 Peter 3. This is talking about the destruction of all things. But the day of the Lord will come and pass as a thief in the night. You're not going to have a chance to know what's going on, in which the heavens will pass away with a great noise, and the elements will melt with fervent heat. Both the earth and the works that are in it will be burnt up. Therefore, since all these things will be dissolved, what manner of persons ought you be in holy conduct and godliness? That's the point. You don't want to be a part of those things that are burnt up. You want to be preserved and taken up with Jesus. This is 1 Peter chapter 3. See, I can get confused sometimes. The divine long-suffering waited in the days of Noah. Remember, he said the number of the days of man are 120 days. He says, I'm giving you 120 days to get things right. And nobody cared. Why? Because everything just continued as normal. Just like today. Everything's going to continue as normal until one day it won't. And you got to be ready. In which a few, that is 8 souls, were saved through water. Here's the important part. Just as Noah and his family were saved through water, there is also an antitype. So it was looking forward to this antitype of baptism, which now saves us. Baptism saves us. Why? Because it's through water. And it's amazing to me how so many people want to disconnect the fact that in the Spirit, Peter says it's through water that Noah and his family was saved, It's through water that we're saved. And they want to remove the water element to it. My friend back in Huron is battling this with somebody he's studying with. She's only caring about the baptism of the Holy Spirit. But right here, the element is through water, not the removal of filth of the flesh. We're not talking about a normal Saturday bath. That's not what we're talking about. But the answer of a good conscience towards God. We are believing what God says and his process and his plan for us to obtain eternal redemption through his Son. And that is only mimicked through the death, burial, and resurrection of Christ through baptism. So that's the end of the class. They're waiting to get in here. I hope this week has been beneficial to you as it has been me as I've been studying. So if you've got any questions or any other comments, let me know after class. And that's all I got. So until Sunday, God bless. Thank you for your time and attention.